inspectors of Reddit. What's the worst violation you've ever seen? Story 1. My stepdad used to be a baker in an authentic recreation of an 18th century New French fortress. Because they sell bread to the public, the health inspector came by, and she was ripping into my stepdad for violations like the stonework walls, the doorless entranceways, or the lack of mosquito zapper. He pointed out that they were following the highest standards except for things that would destroy the authenticity of this 18th century bakery. The health inspector relented and agreed to give him a pass. After verifying the food storage area was secure, they went to the shed, which was a doorless building attached to the bakery. As the health inspector went in, there happened to be an escaped cow licking all of the loaves. My stepdad could only say, "Honestly, this never happens." They passed the health inspection. TLDR, health inspector witnesses escaped farm animal licking all the bread in a bakery. Passes health inspection anyway. Story 2. My favorite Chinese restaurant got shut down. My ex-wife worked for the city, and I asked her what was the deal. She said the health inspectors found Summit being leaking from the ceiling. They lifted the ceiling tile and shined a flashlight and saw multiple eyes staring back at them. It was chickens. They were raising chickens in the ceiling, and chicken was dripping in the food that I had been eating at least once a week. Story 3. My friend was inspecting a restaurant. Walked out the back to find a man stirring a huge pot of curry with his arm, no spoon or anything, just up to his hairy elbows in curry. Story 4. My stepmother is the lead health inspector for a decent-sized suburban town. While I have never asked what the worst thing she has witnessed as part of her job was, I do know of one instance that was pretty gross. A truck full of lobsters was traveling down the highway and crashed. The police came, and eventually they towed the truck. As a board of health inspector, my stepmother was consulted to see if any of the lobsters were viable, and she told them no. The load is a total loss since there were literally lobsters scattered across the highway covered in dirt, sand, etc. Fast forward 24 hours, and one of the restaurants in town ran a special twin lobsters for $19.99. Apparently, the owner of the trucking towing company knew the restaurant owner pretty well, so they made a deal whereby the restaurant would pay a very discounted price for the road lobsters. The restaurant would turn around and illegally serve the lobsters to unsuspecting customers or sell them out of a truck behind the restaurant. I'm not sure what the repercussions were, but I think they were shut down for like a week. They closed shortly thereafter, and now there's a new restaurant there. The towing company lost their contract to tow vehicle semi-trucks with the town and state. Edit source. Story 5. Not a health inspector, but worked in a restaurant where the managers were good friends with one. The coffee ice cream shop next door was shut down out of nowhere, and we were all shocked because they were pretty busy. Health inspector came in one day, and manager asked why it was shut down. Health inspector proceeded to tell my manager that he walked in unannounced early one morning before the shop opened, only to find the owner jerking off behind the counter by the ice cream. Story 6. When I went to culinary school, one of the professors made the statement, if you want to know how clean a restaurant's kitchen is, go to bathroom first before you're seated. If the bathroom is dirty, there's a good chance the kitchen is in the same condition. Story 7. Not a health inspector, but someone in my city repainted their floor with non-slip paint and literally painted over a dead rat, sealing it in there, and to top it off, it was in the middle of the kitchen, not under a bench or anything similar. Story 8. Did food safety inspection at a large slaughterhouse for a while. We did our own inspections each shift, and the government inspector stopped by once a day too. One day, I came around a corner, and one of the workers who was running service for the butchers had dropped a ham on the floor. So, the proper way to handle this for him was to leave it there and call for a re-inspector to come pick it up, take it out to carve off any contaminated bits, and rinse it in boiling water. Now, it relatively often happened meat was dropped on the floor. It's just very, very hard to avoid it when running in a factory setting with human labor. So, this was common. What was uncommon was what the guy did. First, he tried catching it as it fell, which would have been fine, no contact with any surface, and he could have just thrown it back into the tub it had fallen out of. He didn't catch it, though, and it landed on the floor. Thinking that Noon was watching, he tried picking it up and dropped it again. He did this 3 times. So first and foremost, he's not supposed to be touching anything that's been on the floor. It cross-contaminates his hands, and he has nowhere to put the contaminated product anyway. But he did this 3 times and dropped it 3 times. Freshly carved hams can be slippery when wearing vinyl gloves. He then, out of pure frustration and annoyance at the unwieldy ham, dropped down on all 4s and proceeded to pick up the raw, freshly cut 6-kilo ham by his teeth, stood up, him dangling from his chompers, and dropped it into the tub with around 600 kilograms of product, and drove off with the tub for processing. He was fired a few minutes after that, and the entire tub of product discarded. Story 9. The dumpster needed to be moved 6 inches from the back exit of the bar. Otherwise, everything I inspected was up to standard. Bartenders seemed sweaty all the time. Bathroom stalls could have used a little touch-up. Didn't get to spend much time in the basement. I became quite dizzy. For some reason, they were given a passing grade. Story 10 obligatory link to this comment, which made me think at least twice about every restaurant I've ever been to. Story 11 mentioned this one somewhere before on Reddit. Used to have a job working as an inspector for storage tanks at places like dairies and factories. Went to a cheesecake factory once to test a milk storage tank. It had just been cleaned and was being prepped to be filled with a tanker full of milk. I noticed the floor of the tank was covered in bleach. It turned out the floor manager couldn't be ours to spend the time sucking out the rest of the cleaning fluid used in the cleaning process and, as standard, just filled the tank with milk on top of a dozen gallons of bleach. His theory was that there was enough milk to dilute the bleach to acceptable consumption levels. I wrote a report, and he was promptly fired. Edit my 12-gallon estimate is just that. An estimate. It was a huge milk storage at silo 40,000 LIRC, and roughly half an inch of the floor of the tank was covered in cleaning fluid. The dilutions we're talking about probably wouldn't have been harmful or even tasteable after being pasteurized and mixed with cheesecake ingredients. But that's also a guess, and it's also not the point. Story 12, not a health inspector, but a Chinese buffet near me was closed down because it got a 0.5 in its inspection. I got food poisoning from there once. The staff just got up and left, locked the door, never went back. All the food was still out, and everything. A week later, a man was walking his dog past, said, "Chinese buffet," and heard a loud, buzzing noise. Looked through the window to see hundreds of thousands of flies that had taken over the building as their new home. Was so bad that Pizza Hut next door had to close too. Edit to anyone asking, this was in Gloucester, England. Story 13, not a health inspector, but my mom used to work at this restaurant where the owner just did not give a... It was a Mexican restaurant, and my mom told me that once a lady came in asking for caldo de residential beef soup, but they didn't have any more meat, at least not the one used for that dish. They were about to let the lady know when the owner stepped up and told the lady that her food would be right out. The server and my mom were both confused as to what she was going to do. Well, this lady goes and literally digs through the trash and pulls out some beef, some still with bone. She then ran it through water, cooked it, and served it to that poor lady. My mom says the lady was even sucking the bone, and she almost felt sick watching. My mom quit that job soon after. Edit asked my mom again about it. And here's what she said. The bone meat was not raw. It was left over from people who had ordered the same thing. They had almost ran out of that soup. All the meat was gone, so they thought they would not serve anymore. The owner grabbed the bone meat from the trash, rinsed it, and threw it back in what was left of the soup, heated up for a bit, and served it. Just thought I needed to clarify this. I wish my wife was a Redditor. She would own this thread. Here are a couple I remember from her days as a restaurant inspector for the state health department. 1. A complaint from a grocery store that the Chinese restaurant next door was raiding their dumpster each night and taking all the produce they could find. 2. Walking into another Chinese restaurant and seeing pigeons in a cage in the back room. Just regular city pigeons. Asking, "You're not serving these to the customers, are you?" And being told, No, those are just for us. I don't mean to disparage Chinese people by citing 2 incidents about Chinese restaurants, but the truth is that many Chinese people come to the U.S. on a shoestring budget and cut corners as much as they can. Plus, the standards of healthy food service are often very strange to them. Telling someone that they can't cut the lettuce for the salad bar with the same knife they just used to cut a raw chicken is like telling them they have to stand on their head before cooking something. They just don't get it. They always did it this way at home. Your body gets used to fighting off the bacteria you grow up with. People from the other side of the planet have bodies that can handle bacteria we aren't used to in the Midwest part of the U.S., but that's a very hard point to get across. Hey, race, one more from another side of the economic spectrum. I have a friend who plays in a band which has some national recognition. I won't say any more, but they've had a few top 10 hits. He told me once that his band was booked to play a very expensive corporate New Year's party for a very rich corporation. The party took place at a very swanky hotel in a big city. He and the band had a load-in through the hotel restaurant kitchen. Unfortunately, the sewers had backed up, and the entire kitchen of this swanky hotel restaurant was ankle-deep in raw sewage. But there was no way the hotel manager was going to go out in the party room and explain to a host of 1,000 plate diners that the kitchen was closed on New Year's Eve. So the kitchen staff kept cooking, and the waiters kept serving. They put on rubber boots before entering the sewer kitchen to grab the next plate. The moral of the story is that food service is all about the money first. Understandable, because if there's no money, there's no food service, but you're just as likely to get food poisoning at the most expensive restaurant in town as you are at some local hole in the wall. Sometimes more so because there's more money at stake. Story 14, I'm curious. How bad does something have to be to get a 4 health inspection rating? a local restaurant got shut down for a 4 rating. Story 15, not a health inspector, but my mom told me this story some time ago. When she was in her early 20s, she had started working as a waitress for the restaurant in this big fancy hotel. Just a few days after she started working there, the hotel was hosting some big event. So there were a ton of super rich people staying there, and thus the restaurant was super busy. So my mom goes into the kitchen at one point and sees that one of the chefs is clearly sick. He's coughing and hacking and continually wiping his runny nose on a handkerchief right as he's making food. So my mom goes to her boss and is like, hey, this chef is sick. He can't be working right now. He's going to make everyone sick. Her boss tells her that the guy said he was fine and to not worry about it. So my mom goes to the sick guy and tells him that he has to leave to prevent the food from being contaminated. He tells her that he tried to call in sick, but the boss told him that they were going to be too busy and they needed him. And if he didn't show up for work, he'd be fired. So my mom goes back to the boss and he admits that, yeah, he knew the guy was really sick, but he didn't care if everyone else got sick as long as they got through the event. My mom tells her boss that this is wrong and that he needs to send the guy home, take back everyone's food, refund their money, throw out all the food that may have been contaminated, close the place down and clean it up. He simply laughs at her and tells her she's fired. So she went and did the logical thing. She walked out into the dining room, stood on top of the table, and shouted to everyone at the event that the boss forced a sick man to work today, and all of their food was probably contaminated. There was practically a riot. Everyone crowded around and screamed at the boss, demanding their money back. In the end, the restaurant was temporarily closed. Everyone got their money back. The boss of the restaurant was fired by the owner of the hotel, and mom got to keep her job. Story 16 worked in a restaurant. Sitting in the office one day, I hear an awful squeaking, shrieking noise. Took me a little while to find the source. Source turned out to be a mouse, stuck in some old spilled pancake syrup under a storage shelf, being eaten alive by the mouse stuck next to it. Story 17, not health inspector, but I worked as an assistant cook in a restaurant. 2 weeks into the job, I open a cupboard to get a can of tomato sauce, and I see a huge tarantula scuttling away behind the cans. I told the boss what I had seen, so that maybe we should get someone to deal with the huge spider living in the kitchen. Boss turns to me and say, I see you've met Eduardo. Just don't put your hand too close to him, and you'll be good. Later, another cook proceeded to explain to me the spider been living there for 2 years, and they allowed it because he kept rodents and roaches away. This is a true story. So know this, Reddit. Every time that you think about swatting a spider, remember that there's a possibility that a friendly spider is guarding your favorite restaurant's food against nasty critters. Story 18, I had to take a sanitation class for culinary school. One day the health inspector came in and gave us a presentation. He looked up all the citations in town, and my personal favorite was improper use of a hand sink for the local strip club. Story 19, former inspector here. I once discovered a rat infestation in the kitchen of a hospital. They asked me if I could prove my suspicions. I pointed out the numerous foodstuffs with 1 to 2 circular holes chewed in them, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the trail of droppings and footprints coming and going from hole in the floor drain, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the 3 dead rats I had discovered under and around equipment. I think they began to believe me at that point. Citations included rat infestation and absolutely deplorable cleaning practices. Story 20, not me. My cousin. She was a health inspector for the city of Melbourne, Australia many years ago. Her advice, never eat at Chinatown. Dead fish floating in the tanks of seafood restaurants. With barely alive fish in the same tank, slime and mold in said tank's rusty surfaces used as chopping boards and mold-covered wooden chopping boards, raw meats prepared together with raw vegetables. The lady washing the dishes at the cash register was the same lady that cleaned the toilets and made the dumplings. She never washed her hands. It doesn't matter how much you pay. Whether you spent $200 on your meal or $20, they're all as filthy as each other. The most expensive and well-known were actually the worst offenders, cockroaches. Cockroaches everywhere. There's no such thing as an expiry date. Sauces mask everything. There's a saying here, though, that many people are aware of: the nastier the place, the better the dumplings taste. Story 21, not a health inspector, but assistant manager at a restaurant for a year between university. I once saw my sous chef flick a filet steak out of the pan, kick it back up with his foot, and land it back in the pan to continue cooking. He did this 34 times. I was watching on the CCTV, trying not to laugh every time he celebrated each catch. Story 22, when my son was 5 or so. We had a nanny who used to look after him, and she used to take him to a local pub where one of her friends worked. He got used to sitting at the bar, eating a packet of crisp chips, and drinking a soda. I'm starting to realize as I recount this, as it doesn't reflect too well on my parenting skills. Oh well, he's 17 now, so I guess it's too late for social services to come and take him away. Anyway, the nanny was great. No matter what you might say, the nanny and her friend were around the corner in the other bar chatting away when a couple of besuited gentlemen wandered into the bar. My son was laying a line of crisps along the bar, and one of the gents started talking to him. It's worth noting that the regulars in the bar were used to him being there and often referred to him as the boss. They let him pour them drinks and so on, ostensibly under the supervision of the bar staff. Needless to say, it's illegal for 5-year-olds to be employed as bar staff. Even in the UK, I'm in charge here. Would you like a drink? Offered my son, scooting around the back of the bar. No, it's okay, thanks. Where are the crisps for? Oh, I'm feeding my friend. My son replied, really, where's your friend? He lives in that little hole. My son pointed to a hole in the wall towards the end of the bar. And sometimes he comes out, and I feed him. On cue, a small mouse appeared out of the hole, ran along the bar, and started eating the crisps. The men were environmental health officers. The pub was shut down that week and never reopened. Luckily, they weren't police, otherwise the nanny's friend would have been in serious trouble. This story was pieced together from the report of the nanny, and also my son, who thought the whole thing was hilarious. The nanny's friend was quite relieved as she hated the job anyway. Story 23. I'm not a health inspector, but I remember reading a story 8 years ago where an inspector went to check out a kebab shop in Wolverhampton, UK. They found the owner preparing kebabs for that night, while a corpse was lying on a sofa next to him. Story 24. Not a health inspector, but I used to manage a well-known sandwich shop. One day, I discovered a huge colony of black Stachybotrys mold growing behind one of the walls. I mentioned it to my assistant manager, who told me that everyone knew it was there and that the entire staff assumed that I also knew about it and was just keeping my mouth shut. I reported it to the district manager and the owner that day. They both told me that they knew for a fact that black mold was harmless and that they weren't going to pay $3,000 to tear out the drywall and replace it. I was fired inside of a week. I reported them to the local health department, but by the time the health department got around to doing the inspection, they had already fixed the wall. Story 25. When my dad was a teenager, he would go to a beach half an hour away with his mates, and on the way home, they would stop at a great pie place. It was well known, and Dad says they served the greatest pies ever. They got shut down after it got out their pies were full of tin dog food. Story 26. Health inspectors. Do you ever fear being attacked by someone when you're writing up a bad report, particularly a really bad one that would shut them down? You are essentially destroying their livelihood. And I'm sure some would take a little far. Edit or leave the above paragraph as is, so comments below still make sense. However, yes, I worded it wrong. I'm well aware that the problems a restaurant has is the owner's fault, and it's not the big bad health inspector. I suppose I was trying to put myself in the owner's shoes. As an irrational owner, I'd likely see it as an attack on my livelihood. Story 27. On a plus note, I've been a chef for 17 years and haven't ever seen anything overly gross at a restaurant I've worked at. I've mostly done fine dining and high-end chains, though. Although traveling to other countries is a different matter. You may resume eating. Edit to the comments below. I am very aware of what the term chef actually means. That being said, I'm a chef at a rather large restaurant, and I have 60 cooks working for me who refer to me as chef without me asking them to. Story 28. I used to work next to a Chinese place that tenderized 20-pound roasts by repeatedly slamming it on the floor. The pizzeria I was working at the time was so dirty, the wife changed the baby inside your pizza box. At another pizzeria I worked at, I was washing dishes, and the manager came to me with a block of Swiss cheese. It was covered in mold, and he wanted me to scrub it out of the holes. Story 29. Pools that have absolutely no chlorine. Pedicure tubs filters that have never been changed. All of their disinfectants were expired. A restaurant that refused to clean up pest feces urine, refused to properly cool foods, and refused to properly reheat foods. The kitchen had exposed everywhere. Well, it would be exposed if there wasn't a thick layer of grease and no sanitizer. Story 30. I had a health inspector tell me this story. There was a family in which both the elderly mother and a handicapped sibling used wheelchairs. Another sibling lived in the house with them and did all the driving, etc. The health department got a phone call from the local wheelchair company. The brother stopped by and picked up a new, custom-built wheelchair for his sister and for his mother, and returned within about 30 minutes, saying that the sister's wheelchair hadn't been made to the right specifications. It was too small. After he left, the staff noticed several roaches on the chair, so the guy I met got a call. Apparently, it was summer Midwest, both hot and humid, and the house was all locked up, with no open windows for ventilation, curtains drawn, etc. The inspector entered the house, and he said it was so stifling hot that he started to get dizzy, and he thought hallucinate. He said that there was a sound like leaves rustling in the fall, and the walls and floors were kind of vibrating. He then realized it was because they were literally covered in roaches. He immediately evacuated the 3 people living there, and the next day they tented and sprayed the house. He went in a Tyvek suit and knee-high rubber boots and said that the dead roaches were about 2.5 feet deep in most parts of the house. Story 31. Environmental health inspectors don't only cover restaurants. I inspect wells and septic systems. I see sewage every day. The worst thing I've seen are old men coming up to their door naked. And what makes it worse is that they knew what date and time I was stopping by. Story 32. Probably too late for this one, but 2 years ago a colleague in my department under food safety went to inspect a Chinese in a local town. Everything was going okay as food hygiene inspections go for a better-than-average Chinese until she went to inspect the space upstairs above the kitchen. Our policy is that where employees stay, if it's in the same building that is part of the premises, when she went up, she found a large number of illegal immigrants staying there. The police were alerted, and the Chinese was closed down before reopening under another name. I think registered under the owner's wife's name. Another quick new premises inspection followed, and it got a hygiene rating of 4 out of 5, which for the type of premises is about as good as you'd expect, and it was left alone for 2 years. Fast forward to last week. Another colleague went to inspect the premises for their biannual routine inspection. You'll never guess what the police were called for again. Story 33. For as bad as some of these stories are, I hope people understand that people in restaurants do touch your food. There's nothing that you eat in a restaurant that hasn't been directly touched by somebody in the kitchen. Some of you may be thinking, well, why don't they all just wear latex gloves? Actually, there's a couple reasons they break far too easily among others that make it impractical, but most importantly, if you only wear gloves, then whatever it is that you think is on their hands is now just on their latex gloves. Compulsive hand washing, hair nets, and keeping the place properly cleaned is as much as anybody can reasonably expect. Incidentally, Applebee's has to be the cleanest place I ever worked at. If you were standing around, they'd hand you a toothbrush and tell you scrub the grout between the tiles. Every day was a good 2 hours of cleaning after the place closed. That's a good head start. Story 34, kind of the opposite, but my partner's home daycare was inspected once routine check. No big deal. A day later, the fire marshal returned and informed her that out of all the daycares he had visited the previous day, our house was the only one he'd send his kids to. The fact that he felt compelled to drive out of his way just to come tell that boggles my mind. Story 35. One time I went to a restaurant where I was served a disgusting burger. Before I could take a bite, though, a fly went inside my mouth, and I choked on it. I passed out, and the owner and chef thought they killed me, then attempted to bury me in the rain. When the police finally showed up, they thought I was a zombie. They ended up passing the inspection. Story 36. Not a health inspector, but there's one story in Vegas my mom told me about. There's this one bar, brilliantly named the bar, and it has been shut down multiple times. One time it was shut down for being infested with roaches and trying to hide it. One time it was shut down for simply never cleaning anything and having horrible hygiene overall. And more than once it's been shut down for the bartenders doing weird stuff with the drinks. She never elaborated on that part. But from the tone of voice it sounded, then again, none of this is exactly too awful, right? Thing is that isn't the crazy part. The crazy part is that it keep reopening because of popular demand. This place has had huge crowds for years, even though it sucks. And whenever it shuts down, everyone throws a huge fit, and a couple months later it pops back up. And it's not even like the people are stupid and don't know it's a pigsty. They just simply don't care. Story 37. Not a health inspector. Surprise. Surprise, but there used to be a Chinese restaurant in the same area where I worked. About once a week they would leave dead fish in the alley behind the store, with flies crawling all over them. They weren't throwing the fish away. They were storing them back there until they could prep them. Story 38. My CNA instructor once witnessed a McDonald's employee, probably 16 or 17 years old, use a rag in the bathroom to clean the sink and anywhere else that needed wiping down. She later witnessed the employee later used the same rag to wipe down the counters in front of the cash registers. He was fired on the spot. Story 39. Not a health inspector, but there's a big Kebby levy in my city right now because the local Cheddars just got shut down for temporary emergency maintenance. Because of like this, there's also a video that one of the employees took on the day Husha quit, I assume of their kitchen. I've been in the restaurant industry for 10 years, and I've never seen anything like it. The video pans to the fryer, and there are 6 roaches straight up nomming on a French fry, like it's cool, moldy vegetable bits all over the floor that never got swept up. They'll never eat there again, even after they reopen under new management. Pick up the sign in the window. Story 40. Not me. But I remember seeing a news outlet. Hopefully someone can find and link it. TLDR, a girl was working at this Mexican restaurant that gave complimentary chip salsa, which weren't always finished. So the owner had the workers reuse the uneaten chips and serve them to other customers. Girl tells parents who confronts the owner about it, hopefully not having to go to the media legal. Owner pretty much tells him to shove it, and that it's none of their business. The girl's parents go to the media, and the place is shortly shut down. Story 41, also not a health inspector, but it was a busboy at a Fuddruckers in the early 90s. Some asshat customer emptied a diaper into the urinal in the men's room. A fellow busboy grabbed some tongs from the lettuce bin where customers would top their burgers. He used it to pick out the feces from the urinal, clean the tongs by swishing them around in the toilet, then put them back in the lettuce. Story 42, not a health inspector, but witnessed some things in my first job as setup waitress at a banquet hall. The head cook had some hairy arms, and he always mixed the salad with his hands. So, you know that hair is getting in the air, and one day we found a used Band-Aid in the edit in the salad. I survived the assassination attempt. Story 43, taking 10 years as an inspector. Most dangerous is usually not the most disgusting. I've seen entire walk-in coolers they were using at 55-60F, and the staff didn't even notice anything wrong. I've seen piles of mice that died, getting stuck in the grease behind the fryer. I've seen staff throwing raw burgers within the grill, then making salad right after. I've seen squirrels and birds roaming freely inside a bread manufacturer. The stereotypes are true. Chinese restaurant kitchens are almost always filthy. Most common critical violation: dish machine not sanitizing properly. Story 44, mom worked for a hospital. Case after case of food poisoning came in, with one thing in common: a local restaurant had a lobster dinner special. Health inspectors went in and found that they were dumping the half-used clarified butter back in the pot in the serving area as they cleared the tables. Story 45, good that we don't have working health inspectors in my country. Otherwise, you will have enough content to run no sleep for a month, based on experiences people had after looking at the kitchen of the restaurant where they ate. Edit India. Story 46, not a health inspector, but I repair cooking equipment. Walk into a job at a Chinese restaurant. The cook is sitting on the toilet, taking a dump, in full view of the world while shelling peas. Story 47, I'm not one, but oh god, I've seen some. Just a couple months ago, our town had decided to post the low-scoring restaurants on the front of the papers. They were organized in colors, so like yellow and mild, blue was bad, and red was just nope. Our rival restaurant serves similar food and is 5 minutes away, got a 70 red point violation. Story 48, in NSW, Australia. We have this website called Name and Shame. It's official, and it lists the restaurants and takeaway shops that have been issued fines and what they got in trouble for. It's pretty great. I wish every state and country would do this as well. Story 49, if I can add a happy violation, there used to be a restaurant here called the Motor Ant, which was literally a restaurant built around an RV trailer that doubled as part of the dining room, built around it so that every winter they could just drive away and return in spring. So, while there was quite a few ways we knew from the start the place was failing health codes, the biggest one was the 3 fat, happy, purring cats that had the run of the dining room, including cat beds and towers. Huge violation of health code, but clearly they gave no shits. So I and 2 friends show up, order burgers, sit down, and the cats all wander into our laps and begin purring up a storm while we talked and ate. We tipped extra. Story 50, not a health inspector, but I was visiting a friend in Colorado, and his roommate came home from a taco place in Denver. He unwrapped a napkin to show us a tooth that was in his taco. The guy still ate all of his tacos, even after nearly swallowing a tooth. We tried to tell him he should have made a complaint, but he was so nonchalant about it. Blah. Story 51, not a health inspector, but I once worked for a Blimpies in my hometown that wasn't actually a Blimpies. They just rented the storefront after it closed down and kept everything the same. I'm sure that's legal. They used to buy all their lettuce from a homeless guy who pulled it out of dumpsters behind grocery stores. They would leave all the foods in the sandwich prep area there overnight for clarification. This means all the meat and cheese and condiments that were cooled only moderately and from the bottom alone. Overnight, the building itself was disgusting. Not even going to get into that. My personal favorite part is that they refused to train any of their employees, telling them to figure out, which included how to use the meat slicer to chop up dumpster lettuce and manager's discount meat with no safety glove. So naturally, I lost part of my finger the second day. After which they fired me without pay because they didn't want me suing them. Happy-ish ending though. They closed less than a week after that, presumably because a health inspector took one look at the place and started crying. Midwest, man, I don't miss it. Obligatory, not a health inspector. But you know how sometimes gas stations will also have chain restaurants attached? Well, I stopped at one during a road trip because I needed gas. So this was a pretty small station that had somehow managed to fit a Subway and a pizza station inside. I had decided to pay inside so I could use cash, and while I was waiting in line, I smelled that fresh Subway bread and thought I might have to grab a sandwich too. Then I looked down there. Right by my foot was an enormous cockroach, just doing its little cockroach things like hanging out, then flitting away, then peeking its gross head out from under the shelf, This was in the middle of the day, broad daylight with a bunch of people around. They say if you see a cockroach out during the day, the infestation is bad. The fact that it was acting so casual around a bunch of huge humans was also super concerning. I did not get the sandwich. Story 52. I used to work for a very clean, neat freak. Every night we would scrub the entire restaurant floor with degreaser and mop over it. Take apart the Coke machine and soak all pieces in vinegar each night. Take apart the dishwasher and clean the parts by hand. Clean the baseboards, clean the windows, dust. Washed every bucket we kept extra food in, scrubbed under railing table or any ledge. Emptied the cooler, cleaned and refilled. Cleaned the grill with sulfur. Mopped the bathroom, scrubbed bathroom walls. Sanitized every surface. Washed the rags we used to clean. Sweep the parking lot. Sanitize the mops after mopping. Once a month we would be called in on Sunday, and we would get up on display ledges. Take down decorations, big ones like furniture, dust it. Sweep the ledges, scrub every inch of the walls. Take apart and clean all appliances and tables for good cleaning. As an employee, it added an hour and a half to closing and really sucked, but by far the cleanest establishment I've ever seen, and I will continue to give them my business. The restaurant is called Neighbor's Mill in Harrison, Arkansas. They also newly opened one in Springfield, Missouri, and rumor is they are starting chains. I highly recommend it. They bake their own bread fresh every morning beginning at 3 a.m.